Hello, and welcome to History at Bedtime. The most revealing thing about ancient Rome is not always a battlefield, a palace, or the face of an emperor stamped on a silver coin. Sometimes it is a loaf of bread turned black by volcanic heat, a child's toy found in a grave, a scratched message on a wall, a barber's razor, a cheap clay lamp with soot still darkening its spout, a food counter in Pompeii with jars sunk into the masonry, waiting for customers who never came back. Rome was not only the story of Caesar, Augustus, legions, law, conquest, and marble. Rome was also the story of people waking before dawn in rented rooms, carrying water up narrow stairs, buying breakfast in the street, bathing with neighbors, praying to household gods, worrying about rent, illness, fire, debt, marriage, children, and the judgment of the dead. It was an empire, but it was also a daily routine. And for most people who lived under Roman rule, that daily routine was what Rome actually meant. That is what makes this subject powerful. Daily life brings the Roman world close enough to touch. Political history tells us what Rome did. Daily life tells us what Rome felt like, what it smelled like in the morning, what the streets sounded like at night, what a poor tenant feared when smoke rose from the stairwell, what a wealthy matron communicated through the arrangement of her hair, what a freedman hoped people would read on his tombstone, what a child learned by tracing letters on a wax tablet, what an enslaved cook heard from the dining room while serving food to people who owned his body. The Roman world at its height, roughly in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, held tens of millions of people across Britain, Spain, Gaul, North Africa, Egypt, Syria, Greece, Anatolia, the Balkans, and Italy itself. They did not all live the same life. A farmer in Roman Britain, a Greek-speaking merchant in Ephesus, a Jewish artisan in Alexandria, a soldier on the Rhine, a slave in a Campanian villa, and a senator in Rome inhabited the same empire but not the same world. Yet certain patterns repeated everywhere Roman urban life took root. Roads, baths, forums, amphitheaters, coinage, law, household gods, public festivals, written notices, bread, oil, wine, hierarchy, and the constant negotiation between local tradition and imperial order. This is not the story of Rome from above. It is Rome from the street, from the kitchen, from the bathhouse, from the rented room, from the market stall, from the household shrine, from the crowded theater, from the funeral road outside the city gate. It is the story of what Romans ate, wore, feared, believed, bought, sold, desired, endured, and remembered. It is the story of the ordinary Roman day, and through it, the story of an entire civilization seen from the inside. The Roman day began with light, and light in the ancient city was different from light in the modern one. There was no gradual brightening of an artificially illuminated night. The darkness was real darkness, broken only by lamps and torches and the occasional watchfire. When the sky began to lighten in the east, the city began to stir. Bakers had been at work for hours already, their ovens lit before midnight to have bread ready for the morning. By the time the first real light came, the smell of baking bread was already moving through the streets of the city, one of the most consistent sensory features of Roman urban life. Many poorer Romans in the city, especially tenants on the upper floors of crowded apartment blocks, did not have safe or practical kitchens in their homes. This is one important feature of Roman urban life, and it shapes everything else. The apartment buildings, insulae, a term that could mean a city block and, by extension, the apartment buildings within it, housed much of Rome's population. These were multi-story brick and concrete structures where the upper floors in particular often lacked the space, ventilation, structural security, and fire safety to accommodate regular cooking. Open flames in a building of several stories, with timber floors and closely packed neighbors, were a serious risk. So many Romans ate out, or bought prepared food. They bought food from street vendors and cookshops. Thermopolia, heated food counters with built-in ceramic containers for prepared dishes, often compared to fast food counters, and of which the archaeological evidence at Pompeii preserves a remarkable number in excellent condition. To understand ordinary Roman life, begin not with the forum or the palace, but with the question of where most people slept. The elite house, the domus, is the Roman home that survives most vividly in museums and guidebooks. An entrance hall, an atrium open to the sky, a pool to collect rainwater, painted walls, mosaic floors, a dining room, bedrooms, a garden court, perhaps a private bath suite if the owner was exceptionally wealthy. Pompeii preserves houses of this kind in remarkable detail, and they have shaped the modern imagination of Roman domestic life. But they were not the normal home of most urban Romans. They were the houses of people with property, status, space, and servants. For the majority in a city like Rome, the real home was the insula, the apartment block. These buildings rose several stories above the street, sometimes higher than safety allowed, and their quality varied enormously. Some were solidly built, with shops at street level and relatively comfortable apartments above. Others were dangerously cheap structures thrown up by landlords seeking rent from a population too large for the city that held it. The lower floors were better, easier access to water, fewer stairs, safer evacuation in case of fire, more light, more status. The upper floors were poorer, darker, more crowded, hotter in summer, colder in winter, and more frightening when flames appeared below. Fire was one of the recurring terrors of Roman urban life. Cooking fires, oil lamps, braziers for heat, workshops, bakeries, crowded streets, timber floors, and narrow lanes created a city in which catastrophe could spread quickly. Augustus organized a public fire brigade and night watch, the vigiles, partly because fire was not a rare disaster, but a civic problem that needed permanent management. A person living on the 5th floor of a cheap insula would have understood the risk physically. The stairs were narrow. Smoke rose. Water had to be carried by hand. The landlord might not have maintained the building well. A crack in a wall, a sagging floor, a neighbor's careless lamp, all of these were not abstract worries, but part of the mental background of city life. Rent was another pressure. Rome was expensive, and the poor paid for bad housing because they had little bargaining power. Ancient writers complain about the city constantly. The noise, the collapses, the fires, the landlords, the crowds. Some of these complaints come from elite authors who could afford to leave the city for villas in the countryside, and their tone should not always be taken as a neutral social survey. But the physical reality behind the complaints is clear. Rome was densely populated, full of construction, commerce, smoke, animals, people, and argument. To live in it was to live close to others, not in the quiet privacy that modern people often imagine as normal. Inside the apartment, possessions were limited by space and money. A bed or pallet, a chest, a stool, a lamp, a few cooking or eating vessels if the household prepared any food at all, perhaps a small image of a god or a protective charm, clothing folded or hung, tools if the resident worked from home. The Roman poor did not live among many objects, which is one reason archaeology often makes them harder to see. The wealthy leave marble, inscriptions, painted rooms, silverware, imported pottery. The poor leave broken lamps, cheap bowls, worn shoes, bones in rubbish pits, and the holes where beams once held up floors. Water shaped the home as much as fire did. The spectacular aqueducts of Rome brought enormous quantities of water into the city, but that did not mean every apartment had running water. Public fountains were essential. Women, children, slaves, and laborers carried water from neighborhood fountains to households that needed it. A person living several floors up might begin the day by descending stairs with a vessel, waiting at the fountain, talking with neighbors, hearing rumors, and carrying the water back up. This was not a small inconvenience. It was a repeated physical task built into the structure of daily life. The street, therefore, became an extension of the home. People who lacked large interior spaces lived outward. They bought food outside, washed at the baths, socialized at shop fronts, conducted business in doorways, argued in courtyards, and used public places as shared living rooms. This made Roman urban life intensely social and intensely exposed. Privacy existed, but unevenly. The rich could retreat behind walls into gardens and painted rooms. The poor lived where sounds, smells, disputes, and dangers crossed thresholds freely. To understand daily life in Rome is to understand that much of it happened not inside the home, but between home and street, in the narrow space where private survival and public city life touched. The Roman breakfast, if eaten at all, was typically simple and quick. A piece of bread, perhaps dipped in olive oil or spread with honey or cheese. A handful of olives. A cup of well-watered wine, since Romans rarely drank wine without diluting it, and drinking it pure, undiluted, was considered a sign of either barbarianism or desperate alcoholism. Many Romans, particularly the laboring classes who started their day early and whose physical work required more calories, might stop at a street vendor for a more substantial purchase, a bowl of porridge, a small sausage, some kind of stuffed pastry. The Roman street food economy was extensive and served a population that depended on it for daily sustenance in a way that the wealthy classes, with their private kitchens and their cooking staff, did not. Bread was the foundation of the Roman diet at every social level, though the quality of the bread varied enormously across social classes. The finest white bread, made from carefully sifted flour, was the bread of the wealthy. Ordinary Romans ate bread of progressively coarser grades, the flour less refined, the color darker, the texture heavier. The very poor ate bread made from low-quality grain or from a mix of grains and legumes that produced a dense, nutritious, if unrefined loaf. At the bottom of the scale, the grain dole, the annona, the state distribution of grain to qualified Roman citizens, provided the raw material from which Romans either baked their own bread in communal ovens or brought grain to one of the city's public bakeries to have it processed. The bakers of Rome, the pisters, from the Latin for pounding, referring to the stone mills used to grind grain, were a significant professional community, sufficiently important to the city's social stability that various emperors regulated their activities, fixed the weight of the standard loaf, and ensured that the supply of grain to the bakeries was maintained as a matter of public order. The Pompeian bakeries that have been archaeologically excavated show the physical reality of this industry. Large stone mills turned by donkeys or slaves, the grinding stones worn smooth by use, wooden kneading tables, large beehive-shaped ovens of brick, the floor strewn with the flour dust that accumulated despite constant sweeping. Hundreds of individual loaves of bread have been found at Pompeii. The volcanic ash and pumice that buried the city in 79 CE preserved them, carbonized to black but retaining their shape, sometimes with the baker's stamp still visible on the crust. Olive oil was the other foundation of the Roman diet, as fundamental to Mediterranean cooking then as it is now. Romans used olive oil for cooking, for dressing salads and cooked vegetables, for preserving food, for lighting lamps, for cleaning the body in the absence of soap, for rubbing onto the skin after bathing, for anointing religious images and the bodies of the dead. The olive groves of Italy, Spain, and North Africa were among the most economically important agricultural investments in the empire, and the trade in olive oil, conducted in distinctive pottery containers called amphorae, whose distinctive shapes allow archaeologists to trace trade routes with precision, was one of the largest commercial flows in the Roman economy. The Monte Testaccio in Rome, a hill approximately 35 meters high, made entirely of broken amphora sherds, is the archaeological monument to this trade. A mountain of discarded oil containers accumulated over centuries of Roman commerce that gives some sense of the sheer volume of oil consumed by the city. Wine was one of the standard daily beverages of the Roman world, consumed widely across social classes and commonly mixed with water. Clean water was certainly valued, but wine mixed with water was culturally central, and the custom of diluting wine with water was so universal that drinking undiluted wine, as certain foreigners and excessive drinkers were stereotyped as doing, was associated with loss of control and poor judgment. The ratio of water to wine varied with social context. More wine relative to water at formal dinner parties where the atmosphere was festive, more water at everyday meals, more water still for children and for those engaged in tasks requiring clear heads. The wine itself ranged from the finest vintages of the Campanian hills, which Romans enthusiastically connoisseurs evaluated and discussed, and sometimes aged for decades, to the cheap acidic wine issued to soldiers and laborers as part of their daily rations, a vinegary liquid that was useful primarily as a safe alternative to potentially contaminated water. Garum, the fermented fish sauce that is perhaps the most alien element of the Roman diet to modern sensibilities, was one of the signature condiments of the Roman world, used across an enormous range of dishes. Made by layering fish, typically anchovies or other small oily fish, with salt in large ceramic vessels and leaving them to ferment until the mixture produced a potent, deeply savory liquid. Garum and related sauces, such as liquamen, gave Roman food the umami depth that modern cooks might associate with fish sauce, soy sauce, or concentrated stock. Roman cookbooks, particularly the remarkable collection known as Apicius, call for fish sauce in dishes that would, by our expectations, not seem to need it, in meat dishes, in vegetable preparations, in sauces for fruit, in complex multi-ingredient preparations for dinner parties. The Roman palate was calibrated to this flavor, and the production and trade of fermented fish sauces was an enormous industry, with factories on the Iberian coast and the North African shore supplying demand for the pungent liquid in amphorae that traveled through Roman ports. The main meal of the Roman day was the cena, eaten in the late afternoon or early evening. For ordinary Romans, this meal was relatively simple: bread, olives, legumes, perhaps some vegetables, occasionally fish, very occasionally meat, which was expensive and not a daily feature of working-class Roman diet. For the wealthy, the cena was an elaborate social occasion that could last for hours, with multiple courses served in a specific sequence, the guests reclining on cushioned couches arranged around a central table in the triclinium, the formal dining room, attended by slaves who brought each course and poured the wine and removed the dishes between courses. The formal Roman dinner party, as described in detail by various ancient sources including the letter writer Pliny the Younger, and satirized with gleeful excess by the poet Petronius in his account of the fictional freedman Trimalchio's dinner in the Satyricon, was a theater of social performance and competitive display as much as it was nourishment. The dishes served at Roman dinner parties of the wealthy class reflected the empire's geographical reach and the commercial networks that brought exotic ingredients to Rome from every corner of the Mediterranean and beyond. Oysters from Britain, fish from the Black Sea, spices from India, dates from Persia, silphium from North Africa, before that plant disappeared from the historical record, probably under pressure from intense harvesting and environmental limits. Pepper that traveled from the Malabar coast of India to Rome along routes that crossed thousands of miles of sea and land. The Roman appetite for exotic food was genuine and was satisfied by a commercial system of extraordinary sophistication, the demand from Rome's wealthy consumers driving production and trade across the empire and beyond its formal borders. Roman archaeologists find Indian pepper in sites as far west as Britain, evidence of the commercial reach that Roman wealth made possible. Food also marked class more sharply than almost anything else. The same empire tasted very different depending on where one stood in the social order. For a laborer, food was fuel: bread, porridge, legumes, olives, onions, cabbage, cheese when available, cheap wine, and whatever could be bought hot from a counter. For a soldier, food was rationed and practical: grain, sometimes baked into bread or made into porridge, supplemented by bacon, cheese, vinegar, wine, oil, and whatever could be purchased or foraged locally. For a wealthy household, food was performance, a way to display reach, refinement, money, taste, and the ability to command the labor of others. Roman cookery as preserved in elite recipes can look strange to modern readers because it often combines sweet, sour, salty, and savory flavors in ways that do not match later European habits. Honey, vinegar, garum, herbs, pepper, wine, dried fruit, and spices could appear together in the same sauce. A dish might be meant to surprise the guest by disguising what it was. A skilled cook could make a cheap ingredient appear expensive, or an expensive ingredient appear even more elaborate. The elite table was partly a game of recognition and deception. What mattered was not simply whether food tasted good, but whether it demonstrated that the host had access to ingredients, cooks, and cultural knowledge that others did not. The famous Roman dinner party was also a map of status. Guests reclined in assigned places, and placement mattered. The best position gave the greatest honor. The host controlled the wine, the food, the entertainment, and the rhythm of conversation. Slaves moved through the room constantly, visible and invisible at once, expected to hear everything and respond to every need without becoming socially present as persons. Poets and satirists often mocked bad hosts who gave better food to high-status guests and inferior food to lower-status guests at the same table. This tells us that the practice existed and that Romans recognized the humiliation built into it. Dinner could be hospitality, friendship, patronage, insult, alliance, and social warfare all at once. For ordinary people, the cookshop mattered more than the formal dining room. Pompeii preserves thermopolia with counters open to the street and large jars set into the masonry, places where people could buy hot food and drink during the day. These establishments were not glamorous, but they were essential. A tenant without a kitchen, a traveler, a worker between jobs, a shopkeeper unable to leave his stall for long, a person who wanted company more than solitude, all could find something there. The smell of cooked pulses, stews, wine, smoke, bread, oil, and fish sauce would have been part of the street itself. Markets were not silent places of neat exchange, but noisy environments of bargaining, inspection, suspicion, and gossip. Buyers squeezed fruit, smelled fish, checked bread weight, compared prices, and complained. Sellers shouted, flattered, cheated when they could, defended their goods, and built relationships with regular customers. The Roman state cared intensely about food supply because hunger in Rome was political. Grain shortages could produce unrest. Emperors who fed the people secured loyalty. Rulers who failed to supply grain risked anger that could turn dangerous. Bread was not only nourishment, but public order made edible. The annona, the grain supply system, connected the ordinary Roman stomach to the entire Mediterranean. Grain from Sicily, North Africa, and especially Egypt moved by ship to feed Rome. A storm at sea, a failure of harvest, corruption in transport, piracy in an earlier age, or administrative incompetence could be felt in the price of bread. In this way, a poor person buying food in a Roman street was connected to farmers in the Nile Valley, sailors crossing the Mediterranean, officials recording shipments, warehouse workers unloading sacks, millers grinding grain, bakers heating ovens, and politicians watching the mood of the crowd. The Roman breakfast was never just breakfast. It was the final point of an imperial system. Diet also reveals the limits of empire. The wealthy could import pepper from India and boast of oysters from distant waters, but most people remained tied to local seasonality and local price. Fresh meat was not an everyday food for the poor. Fish varied by region and cost. Vegetables and legumes were crucial. Lentils, beans, chickpeas, cabbage, leeks, onions, cucumbers, and herbs filled the gap between bread and occasional protein. Roman writers sometimes dismiss such foods as humble, but humble foods fed the empire. The polished marble of Rome rested, in daily practice, on bread, beans, oil, and wine. Work began early because daylight mattered. A modern city can extend labor deep into the night with electric light, but the Roman day was shaped by the sun, by heat, and by the practical difficulty of doing delicate work after dark with only oil lamps. Workshops opened onto the street. Metalworkers, shoemakers, fullers, bakers, carpenters, potters, scribes, teachers, barbers, money changers, innkeepers, porters, mule drivers, laundresses, tavern keepers, and sellers of everything from fruit to perfume made the city audible from morning onward. Rome was not a city of quiet marble. It was a city of work. The Fullery is one of the most revealing Roman workplaces because it reminds us that clothing was not a simple private possession, but part of an industry of cleaning, dyeing, pressing, and repair. Fullers cleaned woolen garments in tubs, using alkaline substances, including stale urine collected for the purpose to remove grease and dirt. Workers trampled cloth with their feet, rinsed it, stretched it, brushed it, whitened it with sulfur fumes when required, and prepared it for reuse. The process was smelly, physical, and economically important. A toga was not simply worn. It had to be maintained, whitened, pressed, and presented properly. Behind the dignity of Roman clothing stood the labor of people whose hands and feet did the dirty work. Guild-like associations, collegia, gave many workers a social framework beyond the household. Some were religious, some professional, some funerary, some a mixture of all three. A baker, a shipper, a carpenter, or a cloth worker might belong to an association that held meals, honored patron deities, provided burial support, and gave members a sense of identity in a vast city where individual lives could otherwise disappear. The Roman state sometimes feared collegia because any organized group could become politically dangerous, but it also depended on them because they helped regulate labor, trade, worship, and mutual aid in a society without modern welfare institutions. The patron-client relationship shaped work and opportunity at every level. In the morning, clients visited their patrons in the ritual known as the salutatio, greeting the powerful man who might provide legal help, money, food, invitations, recommendations, or protection. In return, the client offered public loyalty, attendance, political support, and visible respect. This system was humiliating, useful, flexible, and deeply Roman. A poor citizen might depend on a patron for survival. A wealthy patron displayed his importance through the number of people waiting at his door. Mourning in Rome was therefore not only about labor and shops, but about the choreography of dependence. Freed people often occupied an important middle position in the urban economy. A person freed from slavery did not become socially equal to the freeborn elite, but freedom opened real possibilities. Freedmen and freedwomen ran businesses, managed shops, worked as accountants, agents, teachers, doctors, and craftspeople, and sometimes accumulated considerable wealth. Their tombs often speak in proud practical language. I built this. I earned this. I provided this monument for myself and my family. The pride is understandable. In a society obsessed with birth, a freed person's success was proof that skill, discipline, and opportunity could still carve out space within hierarchy. Women worked too, even when elite moral writing pretended that respectable female life was limited to domestic virtue. Inscriptions and archaeological evidence show women as shopkeepers, midwives, cloth workers, tavern keepers, property owners, priestesses, patrons, and managers of household economies. Poor women worked because survival required it. Enslaved women worked because they had no choice. Freed women worked because business could sustain independence. Elite women, even when not engaged in trade directly, controlled property, arranged marriages, managed estates, and shaped family strategy. The Roman economy was not male in practice, even when Roman public ideology spoke as if it were. Rural work must not be forgotten, because most people in the Roman world were not city dwellers. They lived in villages, on estates, in farmsteads, in landscapes organized by grain, vines, olives, sheep, and seasonal labor. The city consumed what the countryside produced: harvest, pruning, pressing olives, treading grapes, tending animals, repairing tools, maintaining irrigation, carrying goods to market. This was daily life for millions. The villa system, especially in Italy and parts of the western provinces, could be deeply unequal. Wealthy owners controlled large estates worked by slaves, tenants, and seasonal laborers, while small farmers struggled with debt, taxes, weather, and competition. The Roman Empire looked urban in its monuments, but it was fed by rural hands. The clothing of the Roman world was not simply a matter of personal taste or individual expression, but a carefully codified system that communicated social status, civic identity, gender, and religious role through a visual vocabulary that every Roman could read. The toga, the most distinctive and most symbolically loaded garment in the Roman wardrobe, was not a comfortable everyday garment, but a formal declaration of Roman citizenship and civic participation. Its white wool draped in an elaborate configuration around the body that required assistance to put on correctly and considerable practice and care to maintain in proper arrangement. The toga was what Roman men wore when they appeared in public in an official civic capacity: to vote in the assemblies, to conduct legal business in the forum, to attend religious ceremonies, to present themselves in contexts where their status as Roman citizens required formal acknowledgement. The different types of toga communicated different types of status with a precision that required no words. The toga virilis, the plain white toga of adult male citizens, was the standard civic garment, donned by boys around the age of 14 to 17 in a coming-of-age ceremony that marked their transition to adult citizenship. The toga praetexta, bordered with a purple stripe, was worn by magistrates and by boys who had not yet come of age, its purple border indicating either superior civic status or protected juvenile status, depending on the wearer. The toga picta, entirely purple and embroidered with gold, was worn by triumphant generals during their triumph ceremony and by the emperor on certain formal occasions, the most exclusive and most visually dramatic of the toga types. Its purple color derived from the murex sea snail, and its extreme expense limiting it to the most elevated occasions and the most elevated persons. Most Romans, however, did not wear togas most of the time. The toga was uncomfortable, impractical, and expensive. The average Roman going about his daily business wore the tunica, a simple garment of wool or linen, essentially a large rectangle of fabric folded and sewn to create a basic shirt or dress reaching to the knee, belted at the waist, worn over or under an undergarment, and under the toga when formal occasions required it. The tunica was the workhorse of Roman clothing, adaptable to every season and every activity through layering and adjustment, and the evidence from paintings, sculptures, and written sources suggests that it was indeed what most Romans wore most of the time. The toga reserved for the specific formal occasions when its communicative function was required. Roman women's clothing was distinct from men's in its basic forms and in its communicative function. The stola, a long garment worn over the tunica, reaching to the floor, belted under the bust in the high-waisted style that Roman painting and sculpture depict, was the standard female dress of respectable matrons, and the palla, a large rectangular cloth worn as an outer garment and draped over the head and shoulders when outdoors, provided both modesty and protection from the elements. The specific way in which a woman wore her palla, how much of her face was covered, how it was draped over her shoulders, communicated status and propriety in ways that Roman observers could read as clearly as the stripe on a senator's toga. The color of Roman clothing was far more varied and vivid than the white of the toga might suggest. Romans loved color in their dress when the occasion permitted it, and the range of dyes available through the empire's trade networks was considerable. The deep Tyrian purple reserved for imperial and highest class use, derived from murex shellfish at enormous expense and effort, various shades of blue from woad and indigo, yellows and oranges from plant-based dyes, reds from madder and from certain insects, greens, blacks that were associated with mourning. The wall paintings of Pompeii, which preserved the colors of clothing as the residents of that city actually wore it, show a vivid palette quite at odds with the all-white impression that ancient statuary, long since stripped of its original paint, tends to create in the modern imagination. Footwear in Rome was as socially codified as everything else. The calceus, the shoe worn with the toga in formal public appearances, came in different styles for different ranks of society, with the most elaborate forms indicating senatorial or patrician status through their specific construction and color. The solia, a simple sandal secured by thongs across the foot, was worn in casual contexts and in the home, often removed at the door when entering the triclinium for dinner. Soldiers wore the caliga, the heavy hobnailed boot whose distinctive sound on paving stones marked the presence of Roman military authority wherever it was heard. The very poor went barefoot or wrapped their feet in whatever was available, the evidence of bone analysis showing the physical wear patterns consistent with extensive barefoot walking on hard surfaces. Personal grooming and appearance mattered greatly to Romans of all social classes, and the barber shop, the tunstrina, was one of the central social institutions of the Roman street, a place where men came not only to have their hair cut and their beards trimmed, but to hear the latest news, to discuss politics, to meet acquaintances, to participate in the informal social life of the neighborhood. Roman men of the Republic and early Empire tended to be clean-shaven, a fashion attributed by the Romans themselves to the influence of Greek practice adopted through the Hellenistic world, and the barber's blade, the novacula, a straight razor of iron, was kept sharp by constant use and stropping on a leather strap. The change to beards in the 2nd century CE, associated particularly with the Emperor Hadrian, shifted Roman male fashion toward the bearded appearance, and subsequent emperors were depicted bearded or clean-shaven in ways that established the fashion for their reign. Women's hair was a matter of even more elaborate social attention. The complex coiffures of Roman women at the height of imperial fashion, with their multiple braids and rolls and pinned arrangements, often built up with added hairpieces or wigs to achieve heights and volumes that the wearer's natural hair could not provide on its own, required skilled hairdressers, ornitresses, who were skilled slaves dedicated to this specific function in wealthy households, and who spent considerable time each morning arranging their mistress's hair in whatever style the fashion of the moment required. The evolution of Roman women's hairstyles through the imperial period is so consistently documented in portraiture that modern archaeologists and art historians can use it to date undated portraits with considerable confidence. The increasingly elaborate and architecturally complex styles of the Flavian period, for example, with their high frontal towers of curls, are immediately distinguishable from the simpler center part arrangements of the Augustan period or the elaborate braided styles of the Antonine period. Jewelry was a significant part of upper-class Roman visual culture, worn by women particularly, but also by men in various forms. Gold rings were a standard item of male jewelry and carried strong class associations. The right to wear a gold ring was technically a privilege of the equestrian class, though this restriction became increasingly nominal over time. Women wore earrings, necklaces, bracelets, and finger rings, and the range of precious and semi-precious stones available through the empire's commercial networks: emeralds from Egypt, sapphires and rubies from the East, amber from the Baltic traded through intermediary peoples across northern Europe, garnets from various sources, provided the raw material for jewelry of considerable beauty and variety. The jewelry that has survived from the Roman period, much of it from contexts of burial or concealment such as the hoards discovered across former Roman territory, demonstrates a craft tradition of high technical quality and considerable aesthetic sophistication. The daily lives of Roman women cannot be reduced to a single pattern. Class, legal status, wealth, age, location, family background, and whether a woman was enslaved, freed, freeborn, citizen, provincial, elite, poor, married, widowed, or unmarried changed everything. Roman moral literature often presents women through ideals: the modest wife, the loyal mother, the wool-working matron, the dangerous seductress, the greedy widow, the excessive fashionable lady. These are not neutral descriptions. They are cultural arguments written mostly by men. The evidence of daily life is broader and more complicated. A wealthy Roman woman could manage substantial property, especially by the imperial period. She might own land, lend money, fund buildings, arrange marriages, sponsor religious dedications, manage slaves, correspond with officials, and shape the political prospects of sons and husbands. Elite women could not hold the magistracies that defined formal male political life, but influence does not always require office. A mother from a powerful family could carry networks of patronage that made her indispensable. An imperial woman could appear on coins, receive public honors, and become a symbol of dynastic stability or scandal. Poor women worked because work was survival. They spun, wove, washed, sold food, served in taverns, assisted in shops, worked as midwives, hairdressers, entertainers, prostitutes, nurses, and laborers in family businesses. Some occupations carried respect, others carried stigma. A woman's reputation mattered intensely because Roman society linked female sexual respectability to family honor. Yet the economic reality of the lower classes often made the elite ideal of sheltered domesticity impossible. A woman selling goods in a street stall could not live according to the moral fantasy of never appearing in public. Rome's moral ideals were shaped by those with the luxury to imagine them. Clothing and hair made female status visible. The stola of the respectable matron, the palla drawn over the head outdoors, the jewelry that signaled wealth, the hairstyle that followed fashion at court, all of these communicated messages. But they also required labor. Hairdressing could take hours in elite households. An ornatrix, often enslaved, arranged curls, braids, pins, wigs, and hairpieces. Roman satirists mock elaborate female hairstyles, but the mockery reveals how socially meaningful they were. A woman's hair could place her in time, class, and aspiration. It could show that she followed imperial fashion. It could show that her household possessed the labor to construct beauty. Motherhood was honored and dangerous. Roman epitaphs praise women for chastity, fertility, loyalty, and household management. But behind formula stands reality. Pregnancy could kill, infants could die, and the continuation of family lines depended on bodies under risk. The ideal matron was expected to produce legitimate children, maintain household dignity, and embody moral seriousness. Yet the same society allowed relatively frequent divorce among elites, remarriage, blended families, and complex inheritance disputes. Roman family life was orderly in ideology and messy in practice, as family life usually is. Widowhood could bring vulnerability or power. A poor widow might struggle to survive without a male provider. A wealthy widow could become legally and financially significant, especially if she controlled dowry property or inherited wealth. Inscriptions show women setting up tombs for husbands, children, free people, patrons, and themselves. These inscriptions are some of the clearest voices women leave. Not always literary, not always polished, but direct. They record names, relationships, grief, pride, and sometimes professional identity. Through them we glimpse women not only as symbols in Roman moral thought, but as actors in the daily social world. To include women fully in Roman daily life is not to add a separate chapter to a male story. It is to correct the story. Women fed households, transmitted language and memory, shaped property, managed labor, gave birth, mourned the dead, prayed to gods, bought and sold, served and commanded, adorned and were judged, endured danger and exercised influence. Ancient Rome cannot be seen clearly if half its daily life remains in shadow. The baths, the thermae, and the smaller balnea scattered throughout the Roman city were one of the closest things Roman urban life had to a shared social institution, though never an equal society in the modern sense. In the great public baths funded by emperors and wealthy benefactors, men of very different social classes might find themselves bathing in the same facilities, the slave accompanying his master, sharing the same warm water, if not the same social standing. The price of entry to the public baths was minimal, often just a fraction of the smallest Roman coin, and some emperors made entry free entirely, ensuring that bathing was accessible to Romans of even the most modest means. The great imperial baths of Rome, the baths of Caracalla and the baths of Diocletian, were architectural achievements of staggering ambition. The baths of Caracalla, whose ruins remain one of the most impressive in the city, covered approximately 27 acres, included facilities for swimming, bathing in various temperatures, exercise, library reading, socializing, and various other activities, and could accommodate several thousand visitors simultaneously. The sequence of rooms through which a bather typically moved, from the apoditerium, where clothes were left in the care of an attendant or a slave, through the frigidarium with its cold plunge pool, into the tepidarium with its warm intermediate temperature, and finally into the caldarium with its hot water and steam, provided a graduated experience that was simultaneously about physical cleansing, social interaction, and the particular pleasures of moving through carefully calibrated temperatures in warm stone rooms whose vaulted ceilings and marble surfaces created an atmosphere quite different from any functional bathing space. The baths were where Romans met friends and struck deals and argued about politics and philosophy and the latest scandal and the upcoming games. They were where exercise was taken. In the palestra, the open courtyard that typically adjoined the main bathing hall, and where massages and oil treatments and various forms of grooming were available from the attendants who made their living from the bathing establishment's associated services. The hypocaust system, the underfloor heating that kept the heated rooms of the bathhouse warm even in winter, was one of the more impressive pieces of engineering in ordinary Roman life. A furnace outside the bathing rooms heated air that circulated through a raised floor supported on small brick pillars, keeping the floor itself warm enough to walk on barefoot, and through hollow spaces in the walls that distributed the heat evenly through the room. The physical evidence of this system is visible in every excavated Roman bathhouse. the forest of small brick pillars supporting the bathing room floors above a void through which the warm air once moved, a heating technology not widely used again in the Western world until the modern era of central heating. Water was one of Rome's great public triumphs. The aqueducts that brought water from distant springs and uplands into the city were among the most admired engineering works of the ancient world, and rightly so. Their gradients were calculated with care. Their channels ran underground for long stretches, crossed valleys on arches where needed, and delivered water to distribution tanks that supplied fountains, baths, elite houses, workshops, and public buildings. To a visitor from a smaller town, Rome's water would have seemed almost miraculous. Fountains flowing in public, baths heated and filled daily, pools, basins, drainage channels, and the constant sound of water in a city that otherwise would have depended on wells and the Tiber. Yet Roman water infrastructure did not create modern sanitation. Public fountains improved access, but people still carried water. Baths cleaned bodies, but shared water and crowded spaces also allowed disease to move. Latrines existed, sometimes impressive communal facilities with stone seats arranged over flowing channels. But privacy was minimal and hygiene by modern standards was limited. The sponge on a stick, rinsed in water or vinegar, appears in ancient references and has become famous because it is both vivid and unsettling. Sewers such as the Cloaca Maxima drained parts of the city, but they did not produce a uniformly clean environment. Waste, animals, mud, smoke, rotting food, tanneries, fooleries, and crowded housing created a sensory and biological world far harsher than polished marble suggests. Illness was constant. Romans suffered from malaria in some regions, intestinal parasites, respiratory disease from smoke and crowded housing, injuries from work, childbirth complications, infected wounds, dental disease, fevers of many kinds, and epidemics whose causes they could not understand. Ancient medicine, influenced heavily by Greek theory, explained health through balances of humors, qualities, diet, regimen, season, and environment. Physicians could be highly trained and observant, especially in surgery, bone setting, pharmacology, and practical wound care, but they lacked germ theory, antibiotics, anesthesia in the modern sense, and much of the anatomical knowledge later medicine would develop. Doctors occupied an ambiguous social position. Some were enslaved or freed Greek practitioners attached to elite households. Some were respected professionals. Some were quacks. Roman literature mocks bad doctors freely, which suggests both that people sought medical help and that they distrusted it. A wealthy patient might consult a physician, adjust diet, travel to a health resort, take medicines compounded from herbs, minerals, animal products, honey, wine, and oil, or visit a healing shrine. A poor patient might rely on household remedies, amulets, prayer, cheap practitioners, and luck. Healing was practical, religious, and social at once. The cult of Asclepius, the healing god borrowed from Greek tradition, had a major presence in Roman religious life. His sanctuary on Tiber Island in Rome was associated with healing, and across the empire people visited healing shrines, slept within sacred precincts, made offerings, and hoped for dreams in which the god revealed treatment. The modern separation between medicine and religion did not exist in the same way. A person could visit a doctor and make a vow to a god without feeling contradiction. When illness threatened, Romans used every available channel: skill, ritual, diet, magic, family care, and divine appeal. Death from disease was not a rare interruption of life, but a familiar possibility. This shaped temperament. It helped explain the intensity of family ritual, the importance of tombs, the desire for children, the anxiety around omens, the appeal of mystery cults, and the Roman habit of commemorating even brief lives in stone when money allowed. A child's tombstone could record a life of 3 years, 2 months, and 4 days with precision because the loss mattered, and because writing the number was a form of resistance against disappearance. Daily life in Rome was full of pleasure, noise, food, color, jokes, baths, and games. It was also full of vulnerability. The gods of Rome were not a tidy or systematic collection of divine personalities organized into a clear hierarchy with consistent attributes and consistent stories. They were, rather, an accumulation of divine presences that had been incorporated, adapted, identified with foreign equivalents, and reinterpreted across many centuries of Roman religious history, producing a religious landscape of extraordinary complexity that accommodated an enormous range of beliefs and practices within a general framework of civic obligation that required participation in state religious ceremonies without particularly demanding personal conviction. The 12 great Olympian deities that the Romans had largely inherited and adapted from Greek religion, Jupiter and Juno, Neptune and Minerva, Mars and Venus, Apollo and Diana, Vulcan and Mercury, Ceres and Bacchus, formed the core of the official Roman divine assembly, each with established cult sites, established festivals, established priestly colleges, and established relationships to various aspects of human life and natural phenomena. Jupiter, the king of the gods, was the patron of Roman civic life and imperial authority. His great temple on the Capitoline held the religious center of the Roman state. Mars, the god of war, was among the most important deities in a culture that identified military virtue so closely with civic worth, and his cult was elaborately maintained and his festivals carefully observed. Venus, divine ancestor of the Julian family through Aeneas, received particular attention from the Julio-Claudian emperors who promoted her cult as part of the ideological apparatus connecting the imperial house to divine origin. But the Roman religious world was much richer and stranger than the Olympian pantheon suggests. Romans also worshipped the Lares and Penates, the divine guardians of the household who were propitiated through small daily rituals at the household shrine, the Lararium, typically a niche or alcove in the main room of the house, containing small figurines of the household gods, where incense was burned and small offerings of food or wine were made each morning as a routine part of the household's daily life. The relationship between a Roman family and its household gods was intimate and regular in a way that the relationship with the great Olympian deities was not. The Olympians were approached at their temples for specific needs or on their specific festival days, but the Lares were simply there, permanent presences in the household, requiring daily acknowledgement and daily maintenance in the form of small ritual acts that kept the protective relationship active. The genius of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, was also a religious object of reverence within the family, a divine or semi-divine force associated with the generative and protective power of the household's founder and transmitted through the male line. Slaves within the household participated in these domestic cults alongside free family members. The shared ritual practice of the Lararium creating a form of common religious life across the household's internal social divisions. The birthday of the paterfamilias was a household religious occasion, celebrated with offerings to his genius. The birthday of the emperor, whose genius was incorporated into the state cult, was similarly observed throughout the empire. Death and the dead occupied a significant place in Roman religious life, expressed through an elaborate set of beliefs, practices, and ritual obligations that shaped how Romans thought about mortality, what they hoped for after death, and how they maintained their relationships with those who had died. The Roman dead were buried outside the city walls. The Appian Way south of Rome was lined on both sides with elaborate tomb monuments for miles, the most visible expression of the Roman impulse to commemorate the dead in permanent and publicly visible form, and the spirits of the dead, the manes, required regular propitiation through offerings at the tomb to ensure their peaceful rest and their continued benevolence toward the living. The annual festivals of the dead, particularly the parentalia in February, were occasions when families visited the tombs of their ancestors, made offerings of flowers and food and wine, and performed the ritual acts that maintained the relationship between the living and the dead on which Roman religious life depended. The Roman calendar was itself a religious document as much as a practical one, a structured sequence of festivals and sacred days organized throughout the year that defined the rhythm of Roman civic and religious life. The feriae, the festivals and holidays, occurred on specific days designated by the religious calendar, and on these days various categories of work were prohibited and specific rituals were required. The calendar divided days into several categories: dies fasti, on which legal business and public assembly were permitted; dies nefasti, on which they were not; dies comitiales, on which the citizen assemblies could meet; and various other designations that organized the religious and civic obligations of the Roman year into a comprehensive structure. The festivals themselves ranged from grand public celebrations with processions and sacrifice and games, to smaller, stranger rituals of great antiquity whose original meaning had often been lost, but whose performance continued because the proper maintenance of the traditional religious calendar was understood as a civic and political obligation rather than simply a personal one. The great public sacrifices that marked the major festivals were elaborate performances conducted by priests according to protocols so detailed and so rigid that the sacrifice was considered invalid if any element of the prescribed ritual was incorrectly performed, requiring the entire ceremony to begin again from the start. The sacrificial animal, typically an ox or a pig or a sheep, depending on the deity and the occasion, was processed to the altar, inspected to ensure it was free of defects that would make it unacceptable to the god, garlanded with flowers and ribbons, and killed with a single blow by the sacrificial attendant while the presiding priest maintained the proper prayers and gestures. The haruspices, specialists who read the entrails of sacrificial animals for omens, would examine the liver and other organs of the slaughtered animal for signs of divine favor or disfavor that would determine whether the occasion was propitious for whatever enterprise the sacrifice was intended to support. Roman religion was often less about belief in the modern private sense than about relationship, obligation, and correct action. The gods did not require a creed recited in the heart so much as proper attention given in the proper form at the proper time. Do you tida? I give so that you may give, is a simplified formula often used to describe the Roman religious mentality, and while it cannot explain everything, it captures something important. Ritual maintained exchange. Humans gave offerings, vows, prayers, games, temples, incense, wine, animals, and attention. The gods, if properly honored, protected the household, the field, the city, the army, childbirth, harvest, boundary stones, trade, travel, and the enormous fragile machine of the state. This made religion practical and everywhere. A shop might have a small shrine painted on the wall, calling on Mercury for commerce, Bacchus for wine, the Lares for protection, the genius of the owner or place for local blessing. A crossroads shrine honored the Lares Compitales. A farmer observed rituals for boundaries and fields. A soldier carried standards with religious significance and swore oaths that bound him not only legally but sacredly. A magistrate taking office made vows. A general before battle observed omens and sacrifices. A family beginning the day might offer a bit of food or wine at the lararium before work began. Omens mattered because Romans believed the gods communicated through signs. The flight of birds, thunder, lightning, unusual births, strange natural phenomena, dreams, and the condition of sacrificial entrails could be interpreted as signals of divine approval or warning. Elite Romans could be skeptical in private and still deeply committed to public ritual and practice, because religion was not separate from politics. A consul who ignored bad omens could be accused not merely of impiety, but of endangering the state. A failed sacrifice had to be repeated because error in ritual was not a minor embarrassment. It could mean that the gods had not accepted the offering. Foreign gods entered Rome constantly. This was one of the strengths of Roman religion. It could absorb. Cybele came from Anatolia, Isis from Egypt, the Roman cult of Mithras, which used the name and some imagery associated with Iranian tradition, but developed as a distinct mystery religion within the Roman Empire, especially among soldiers and officials. Sol Invictus rose in importance later, and countless local deities across the provinces were identified with Roman equivalents. A Celtic god might become associated with Mercury or Mars. An Egyptian goddess might be worshipped by Romans in Latin-speaking cities. The empire did not require all religious traditions to disappear. It often translated them, reclassified them, and gave them a place within a broader ritual order. This tolerance had limits. Rome tolerated religious difference when it did not seem politically dangerous. Practices perceived as secretive, socially disruptive, or disloyal could be suppressed. The Bacchanalian affair of 186 BCE, long before the imperial height, shows the state's willingness to intervene violently when a cult appeared to create networks outside acceptable control. The later conflicts with Jews and Christians developed from specific political and theological tensions, refusal to participate in certain public cults, questions of loyalty, rebellion in Judea, the exclusive claims of monotheistic worship, and the symbolic centrality of sacrifice to imperial unity. Roman religion could be flexible, but it did not understand religious refusal in the same way a modern secular state might. For daily life, the most important point is that religion did not appear only on festival days. It structured ordinary confidence. The lamp at the household shrine, the image of the lares above a counter, the amulet around a child's neck, the cursed tablet buried against an enemy, the vow made in illness, the coin offered before travel, the procession passing through a street, the smell of incense at a doorway. These were not decorative details. They were the infrastructure of meaning. Romans lived in a world crowded with powers, and daily life was the art of keeping those powers properly addressed. The games, the ludi, were so closely integrated with the Roman religious calendar that they cannot be understood separately from it. The great game festivals of the Roman year, the Ludi Romani in September, the Ludi Plebii in November, the Ludi Apollinaries in July, and others, were formally religious occasions, celebrations in honor of specific deities, through which the gods were honored and propitiated through the provision of public entertainment. The chariot races of the Circus Maximus, whose capacity was enormous, with ancient and modern estimates varying, but all agreeing that it held crowds on a scale no other Roman entertainment building could match. The gladiatorial contests of the amphitheaters, the theatrical performances of the theater festivals, all of these were presented within a religious framework that made attendance not simply recreation, but participation in civic religious life. The chariot races were the most popular public entertainment in Roman life, and the passion they generated among Roman crowds was intense, partisan, and socially pervasive in ways that modern sports enthusiasm provides some analogy for. The four racing factions, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, each commanded enormous popular following, and allegiance to a faction was a significant social identity that cross-cut other social categories. Emperors who aligned themselves publicly with one faction or another were making political as well as recreational choices, and the crowds at the Circus Maximus were among the few contexts in which the Roman population could give voice to collective opinions, including opinions about the emperor, without the immediate threat of retribution that would accompany any more organized political expression. When the crowd in the circus cheered or booed or shouted demands, emperors knew they were hearing something real about the public mood. Gladiatorial contests occupied a more ambiguous social position than the chariot races. Their earliest origins are debated, but the first Roman evidence connects them strongly with funerary munera, obligations or offerings made in honor of the dead, and later writers associated them with pre-Roman Italian traditions, whether Etruscan, Campanian, or a mixture of both. By the imperial period, this funerary background had largely receded, and the munera, the gladiatorial shows, had become a public spectacle on an enormous scale, sometimes lasting multiple days, involving hundreds of pairs of fighters, attracting crowds from across the city and the region, and serving as vehicles for the competitive display of generosity by the wealthy and politically ambitious individuals who funded them. The gladiators themselves, while drawn from the slave population, the criminal population, and captured prisoners of war, also included volunteers who chose the profession for the income, the celebrity, and the excitement it offered, men who found in the life of a gladiatorial school, with its regular food and medical attention and the possibility of fame, a preferable alternative to the uncertain poverty of free but destitute urban life. The theater in Rome was enormously popular but occupied a somewhat ambiguous moral status in Roman conservative thinking. Stage performance was a degrading profession in Roman eyes. Actors, like gladiators and prostitutes, occupied a legal category of infamia, social dishonor, that excluded them from various civic rights and privileges even as their performances were enthusiastically attended by virtually everyone, including the people who held them in official contempt. The plays performed in Roman theaters ranged from the Greek-derived tragedies that dealt with mythological subjects in elevated language, to the comedies of Plautus and Terence that adapted Greek comic models to Roman settings and Roman characters, to the various forms of popular entertainment, including mime and pantomime, that were enormously popular but were considered the least artistically serious of theatrical forms. The theater buildings of the Roman world, from the Grand Theater of Marcellus in Rome to the hundreds of smaller theaters in provincial cities across the empire, were significant architectural investments. Their curved seating banks in stone, derived from the Greek theatrical tradition, but increasingly enclosed and elaborated in Roman versions, providing a controlled visual and acoustic environment for performances that were simultaneously entertainment and civic occasion. Entertainment in Rome was never just entertainment. It was social order, political communication, religious obligation, class display, emotional release, and collective identity performed in public. A crowd in the circus or amphitheater was not merely an audience. It was the people made visible to itself. In a society where ordinary citizens had lost much of the political power that earlier republican institutions had promised, public spectacle became one of the few places where mass feeling could be heard. Cheers, chants, demands, insults, and silence all mattered. The Circus Maximus was the greatest theater of Roman popular emotion. Chariot racing combined speed, danger, faction loyalty, gambling, and spectacle in a form that could hold the attention of almost every social class. The driver, often enslaved or freed, could become a celebrity of astonishing fame and wealth. The horses had names and followings. The factions were not merely colors, but institutions with managers, trainers, stables, supporters, and political significance. A race could turn in a moment, a wheel striking the barrier, a team crashing, a driver dragged, a favorite surging ahead on the final lap. The crowd responded with the force of tens of thousands of bodies and voices. Gladiatorial games were more morally complicated. Romans admired courage, discipline, endurance, and skill. They also enjoyed violence. Gladiators were in fames, socially dishonored, yet the best of them became objects of fascination and desire. Graffiti from Pompeii preserves names of gladiators praised like modern athletes. Women wrote admiration for fighters. Children probably imitated them in play. The arena transformed marginal men, slaves, criminals, prisoners, volunteers of low status, into temporary figures of heroic attention, only to remind everyone that their lives remained controlled by others. The contradiction was part of the attraction. The amphitheater taught Romans how to look at power. The editor, the person who sponsored the games, gave the crowd a gift and received gratitude, status, and political capital in return. The emperor, when present, sat as judge of life, death, mercy, and abundance. Animals from distant provinces were displayed and killed, turning empire into spectacle. Lions, leopards, bears, bulls, ostriches, crocodiles, and other creatures whose presence in Rome proved the reach of Roman power. Executions of criminals could be staged as mythological punishments. War captives could become entertainment. The empire consumed the world symbolically in front of its own citizens. Theater offered another kind of release. Comedy, mime, pantomime, tragedy, music, dance, obscene jokes, political allusion, mythological costume, and celebrity performers filled Roman stages. Pantomime dancers could become wildly famous, communicating entire stories through movement, while singers and musicians accompanied them. Elite moralists often despised popular performance, especially mime, for its sexuality and vulgarity, but moral complaint is usually evidence of popularity. People attended because they enjoyed it, and because performance gave shape to emotions that official civic life could not always contain. Gambling was everywhere, officially restricted in some contexts but widely practiced. Dice, knucklebones, board games, betting on races, wagers in taverns, small games in streets. Romans loved chance. This, too, is revealing. A society that valued order, law, hierarchy, and ritual also loved the sudden reversal of luck. The throw of dice, like the turn of a race, compressed fate into a visible moment. A poor man could win for an hour. A rich man could lose face. A crowd could become one body. The Roman day was disciplined by hierarchy, but Roman entertainment gave that hierarchy controlled moments of danger. The family was the fundamental social unit of Roman life, organized around the authority of the paterfamilias, the male head of the family, whose legal power over his wife, his children, and his slaves was, in Roman legal theory, essentially absolute. The patria potestas, the power of the father, was one of the most distinctive features of Roman law compared to other ancient legal systems, giving the paterfamilias the theoretical right of life and death over members of his household that was rooted in the deep legal history of the Roman state, and that persisted in formal legal theory long after it had ceased to reflect the social reality of Roman family life and practice. The social reality was considerably more nuanced. Roman women of the upper classes had, over the centuries of the Republic and the early Empire, acquired a substantial degree of practical independence that the formal legal framework did not fully reflect. They could own property in their own name, could make wills, could conduct legal proceedings with increasing effectiveness as the law developed mechanisms that allowed women to act with less dependence on male guardians, and could participate in the social and cultural life of the upper classes as significant actors rather than simply as appendages to their male relatives. The women whom Pliny the Younger describes in his letters, the women who appear in the love poetry of Catullus and Ovid and Propertius, the women whose portraits appear on coins and in sculpture, these are not passive figures of no personal significance, but individuals whose social presence and whose personal qualities were real and recognized. Marriage in Rome was a matter of considerable social, economic, and political complexity, and its forms and its practice evolved significantly across the centuries of Roman history. The older form of marriage, in which the wife passed entirely into the legal authority of her husband and became in legal terms a member of his family rather than her father's, was increasingly replaced through the Republican period by a form of marriage in which the wife remained legally part of her birth family, retaining rights to her own property and maintaining a legal connection to her father's household rather than being fully absorbed into her husband's. This change had significant practical consequences, giving women greater legal independence in the management of their property and making divorce, which both parties could initiate by simply stating their intention and separating, a somewhat simpler process than it might otherwise have been. The childhood of Romans of the upper classes was a period of careful education aimed at producing capable adult citizens who could function in the competitive literary, rhetorical, and political culture of Roman elite life. Boys and girls both received basic education in reading, writing, and arithmetic from a literator, a basic teacher who often ran a small school in a rented space, sometimes in a shop or a portico, to which children were accompanied by a pedagogue, a slave attendant whose responsibility was both physical escort and basic academic supervision. More advanced education in grammar and literature was provided by a grammaticus, and the highest level of formal education, in rhetoric, the art of public speaking that was the core skill of Roman public life, was provided by a reader. The texts studied at these various levels were primarily the great works of Greek and Latin literature. Homer and Virgil, Cicero and Demosthenes, the historians and the philosophers and the poets who constituted the shared literary inheritance of the educated Roman. The slave population of the Roman Empire was enormous, and its presence shaped every aspect of Roman life in ways that modern audiences sometimes underestimate. Estimates of the slave population vary sharply, but for the empire as a whole, scholars often suggest something closer to 10%, perhaps higher in some periods and regions, while Italy and the city of Rome almost certainly had a much heavier concentration of enslaved people than many provinces. Slaves worked in every sphere of Roman economic and social life. As agricultural laborers on the great estates, as craftsmen in workshops, as domestic servants in private households, as skilled professionals, doctors, teachers, secretaries, musicians attached to wealthy households, as gladiators, as miners in the most brutal conditions that the Roman system imposed on any of its unfree people. The range of conditions under which enslaved people lived and worked was enormous, from the domestic slave of a thoughtful master who might be treated with something approaching genuine consideration and who might accumulate enough of the small payments sometimes made for exceptional work to eventually purchase their freedom, to the mind slave whose life expectancy was measured in months and whose daily existence was one of unremitting physical misery. Freedom was a real possibility for many Roman slaves, and the practice of manumission, the formal freeing of a slave by their owner, was common enough that freed people, the liberti, constituted a significant and important social category in Roman life. A freedman or freedwoman acquired Roman citizenship upon manumission and certain legal rights that full citizens possessed, though various social disabilities and obligations to their former owner, now their patron, persisted after freedom. The freed people of the imperial household, the secretaries, accountants, messengers, and various specialists who ran the administrative machinery of the imperial court, became in the early empire a surprisingly powerful group. Their proximity to imperial power and their accumulated expertise in imperial administration giving them influence that sometimes exceeded their formal social status, to the considerable irritation of the traditional Roman aristocracy. The Roman household was not the modern nuclear family. It was a legal, economic, religious, and social unit that could include parents, children, grandparents, unmarried relatives, enslaved people, freed dependents, clients, apprentices, and hired workers, all under the authority or influence of the household head. The word familia itself could refer not only to relatives, but to the enslaved people attached to a household. This matters because Roman domestic life cannot be understood only as affection and kinship. It was also property, power, labor, inheritance, and ritual. Birth was dangerous. Pregnancy and childbirth carried real risk for both mother and child, and Roman families lived with that knowledge. Midwives were essential figures, combining practical experience with traditions of medical and ritual knowledge. A newborn was not immediately secure in the social sense either. The father, in traditional Roman practice, acknowledged the child and accepted it into the household, a moment that carried both emotional and legal meaning. Naming ceremonies, protective amulets, and household rituals surrounded infancy because infants were fragile and the boundary between life and death was painfully thin. Children played, learned, misbehaved, and worked. The archaeological record preserves dolls, toy carts, rattles, miniature dishes, knucklebones used in games, and graffiti that may have been scratched by children practicing letters. Elite boys were trained for public life through grammar, literature, and rhetoric. Girls in elite families could also receive education, especially in reading, writing, music, and literary culture, though expectations differed. Poor children often learned by working alongside adults. A child in a workshop might absorb a trade long before formal adolescence. An enslaved child might be trained for domestic service, craft work, or sale. Childhood existed emotionally, but it did not always mean protection from labor. The coming of age of a Roman boy was marked by the assumption of the toga virilis, the toga of adult male citizenship. The ceremony was more than a change of clothing. It was a public statement that the boy had entered the civic world. He could now be seen differently by law, family, and community. A girl's transition into adulthood was more closely tied to marriage, fertility, and household role, though elite girls could be politically significant through the marriages arranged for them. Roman adolescence was short by modern expectations. People entered adult responsibilities early because life itself was uncertain and family strategy could not wait. Marriage was not always romantic, but that does not mean Romans lacked affection. Elite marriages were often arranged for property, alliance, status, and family continuity. Divorce was comparatively easy in many periods, especially among the upper classes, and remarriage was common. Yet tomb inscriptions reveal deep tenderness between husbands and wives. Letters preserve worry, grief, irritation, devotion. Roman marriage was both a social contract and a human bond, and the balance between those two realities varied from household to household. To say that Roman marriage was political is true. To say it was only political is false. The paterfamilias held formidable theoretical authority, but daily life softened and complicated legal theory. A father could be stern, generous, absent, affectionate, tyrannical, or dependent on the very people he formally controlled. Mothers shaped children profoundly. Grandmothers preserved family memory. Nurses and enslaved caregivers often formed deep emotional bonds with children they raised but did not legally own. A child might love an enslaved nurse more intimately than a distant father. An elite mother might depend on enslaved women for the practical work of child-rearing, while still claiming the moral identity of motherhood. Roman family life was full of these contradictions. Old age brought its own hierarchy. In a society that honored ancestors, age could carry dignity, especially for men of status. But old age also meant vulnerability. Without children, free dependents, savings, or patrons, an elderly person could become precarious quickly. Tomb inscriptions sometimes emphasize filial devotion because caring for parents was both moral expectation and social display. The Roman family promised continuity, but that promise depended on survival of children, of property, of memory, of names written in stone before time erased the voice that once spoke them. No honest account of daily life in ancient Rome can treat slavery as a side detail. It was not a marginal institution. It was woven through the economy, the household, agriculture, entertainment, administration, mining, construction, education, medicine, and sexual exploitation. Roman society was built in part on the ownership of human beings, and daily comfort for many free Romans depended on daily unfreedom for others. A household dinner, a polished toga, a clean bath, a copied manuscript, a farm's profit, a senator's leisure, even the education of elite children, all of these could depend on enslaved labor. The experience of slavery varied so widely that a single description can be misleading. An enslaved secretary in a wealthy household, literate in Greek and Latin, responsible for correspondence and accounts, might live materially better than many free poor people. An enslaved mine worker in Spain or Dacia might endure conditions so brutal that survival itself was uncertain. A domestic slave could be exposed to intimacy, violence, favoritism, punishment, sexual coercion, opportunity, and emotional entanglement all within the same household. A farm slave might work under overseers far from the owner's gaze. A public slave owned by a city could serve in administration or maintenance. Legal status united them. Daily experience divided them. Roman slavery was not based on a single racial category in the modern sense. Enslaved people came from war, piracy, exposure, debt, birth to enslaved mothers, trade across frontiers, and internal sale. A person might be Gaulish, Greek, Syrian, Thracian, African, Germanic, Jewish, Dacian, or born in Italy. This diversity made slavery visually and culturally varied, but it did not make it humane. The absence of a racial basis did not soften the core fact. An enslaved person was property under law, subject to sale, punishment, separation from family, and control over body and labor. Manumission complicates the picture because freedom was possible for many, especially in urban domestic and skilled contexts. A slave might save peculium, a kind of personal fund permitted by the owner, and purchase freedom. A master might free a loyal slave in a will. A household might free a slave who had served for years. Free people could become citizens, marry, own property, run businesses, and build families. But manumission did not erase the past. Free people owed obligations to former masters, now patrons. Their social status remained marked. The children of freed people could rise further, but the memory of servitude shaped family identity. The emotional world of slavery is difficult to reconstruct because enslaved people left fewer written records in their own voices. Yet they appear everywhere in the evidence, in names on tombstones, in legal disputes, in household graffiti, in accounts, in curses, in dedications to gods, in collars worn by runaway slaves promising reward for return, in the silent physical spaces of service quarters and workshops. Sometimes inscriptions set up by former slaves for spouses, children, patrons, or fellow free people reveal intense family feeling and pride. Sometimes elite texts reveal casual cruelty. The combination is uncomfortable because Roman life was uncomfortable in exactly this way. Civilized refinement and structural brutality existed side by side. This is why the beauty of Roman domestic life must always be seen honestly. A painted dining room is beautiful. A mosaic floor is beautiful. A bathhouse is impressive. A library is precious. But someone cleaned the floor, heated the water, carried the lamps, cooked the meal, copied the text, emptied the chamber pot, and absorbed the anger of the owner. To tell daily life truthfully, we must allow both things to stand together: Rome's extraordinary cultural achievement and the human cost built into its foundations. Law was one of the invisible structures of daily Roman life. It did not appear every morning as visibly as bread or water, but it shaped who could marry whom, who could inherit, who could own property, who could testify, who could be beaten, who could appeal, who could make a contract, and whose body belonged to someone else. Roman law was one of the empire's most durable creations precisely because it reached into ordinary matters with unusual clarity. Sale, rent, debt, guardianship, dowry, injury, theft, wills, boundaries, partnerships, and obligations between patron and client. Status determined legal reality. A senator, an equestrian, a citizen artisan, a freedwoman, a peregrine without citizenship, an enslaved person, a soldier, a child under paternal power, and a provincial town councillor did not stand in the same relationship to the law. The Roman world was not built on equality before law in the modern sense. It was built on ranked legal categories, each carrying rights, burdens, protections, and exclusions. To know a person's status was to know what could be done to them, what they could demand, and how much the state recognized their voice. Citizenship mattered because it gave a person a stronger claim on Roman protection. A citizen had legal privileges that non-citizens lacked, including in many circumstances the right of appeal and protection from certain forms of degrading punishment. This did not mean citizens were safe from injustice, especially if poor or politically weak. But status changed the rules. The famous declaration, "I am a Roman citizen," carried force because Roman citizenship was not merely identity. It was a legal shield, a social asset, and a mark of belonging within the imperial order. Contracts made daily life function. Renting a shop, lending money, selling a slave, arranging a dowry, hiring labor, forming a business partnership, shipping goods by sea, apprenticing a child, buying land, or leaving property in a will all required recognized legal forms. In the papyri of Roman Egypt, this legal world becomes wonderfully ordinary. People record loans, complain about neighbors, settle inheritance disputes, register births, lease fields, and petition officials in language that is both formal and deeply human. Rome's power was not only that it conquered, it created procedures through which people could argue, claim, complain, and record. Punishment, however, revealed the sharp edge of hierarchy. The same crime could be punished differently depending on status. Elite citizens might face exile, fines, or loss of rank, where lower status people could face flogging, forced labor, crucifixion, exposure to beasts, or execution in public spectacle. Roman justice was not blind. It looked very carefully at rank. This inequality is essential to understanding the Roman world because it shows how deeply social hierarchy entered the body itself. The law did not only decide property, it decided pain. Citizenship, law, and paperwork also helped make the empire legible to itself. Censuses counted people and property. Military diplomas recorded grants of citizenship to veterans. Tax registers tracked obligations. Boundary stones fixed rights in land. Wills carried family memory forward. Legal tablets preserved agreements in wax or wood. The Roman habit of writing things down did not eliminate uncertainty, but it created a documentary culture that made power durable. Daily life in Rome involved not only voices in the street, but names and records, signatures, seals, witnesses, and documents stored against future dispute. For the ordinary person, law could be protection, burden, opportunity, or threat. A freedman might use it to secure property for his children. A widow might use it to defend her dowry. A creditor might use it to pursue payment. A landlord might use it to evict a tenant. An enslaved person might appear in law primarily as property, unless freed. A provincial community might petition the emperor for relief. The grandeur of Roman law lies partly in its sophistication. Its cruelty lies partly in whom that sophistication served unequally. Both truths belong in the same story. The soldier's life was another version of Roman daily life, disciplined more tightly than almost any civilian routine. A legionary was not always fighting. Most days were labor, marching, training, digging ditches, building roads, repairing forts, carrying equipment, standing guard, collecting supplies, and maintaining the hard practical order on which Roman military success depended. The famous Roman camp was itself a daily machine. Measured streets, tents or barracks, gates, headquarters, workshops, latrines, granaries, and watch rotations, all laid out with a regularity that turned temporary occupation into organized space. A soldier carried Rome with him. In a frontier fort in Britain or along the Rhine, the daily rhythm included Latin commands, military law, religious rituals to the standards and imperial cult, pay records, letters home, gambling, cooking, equipment repair, and the social life of men separated from their original communities for years. Wooden writing tablets from Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall preserve invitations, supply lists, complaints, duty rosters, and personal letters that make the Roman army feel suddenly intimate. A commander's wife invites another woman to a birthday celebration. Soldiers ask for socks, cloaks, and underwear. Officers record who is absent, who is sick, who is assigned to tasks. Empire becomes handwriting on thin wood. Military food was practical and repetitive, but not necessarily poor. Grain remained central, supplemented by bacon, cheese, lentils, beans, wine or sour wine, oil, and local purchases. Soldiers ground grain, baked bread, cooked in mess groups, and relied on supply chains that were among the most complex logistical systems in the ancient world. A legion on campaign was a moving city, and feeding it required planning that connected farmers, pack animals, river transport, roads, warehouses, and officials. Roman military strength was not only courage or discipline, it was supply. Veterans mattered to civilian life because the end of service often meant settlement. A veteran might receive land, money, citizenship if he had served in auxiliary units, and a place in a colony that extended Roman culture into provincial landscapes. Veteran colonies could reshape regions, introducing Latin inscriptions, Roman law, urban planning, and loyal populations with a stake in imperial order. For the veteran himself, retirement was the hoped-for reward for decades of obedience. For local populations, the arrival of veterans could mean opportunity, tension, land redistribution, intermarriage, and cultural change. The army was also a channel of mobility. A man from a provincial background could enter service, travel enormous distances, learn Latin or another administrative language, acquire skills, money, citizenship, and connections, and return home changed. He might bring foreign gods, foreign habits, or a spouse from far away. Soldiers spread cults such as Mithras and carried local traditions along the roads of empire. In this sense, the army did not simply defend frontiers. It circulated culture. It made the empire move. The social and commercial life of the Roman city was organized around its street network in ways that differed fundamentally from modern urban life. The Roman street was not primarily a traffic corridor, but a commercial and social space in which the boundary between indoors and outdoors was far more permeable than modern architecture creates. The ground floors of insulae typically housed shops that opened directly onto the street through wide doorways that were unbarred during business hours. The interior of each shop and its attached storage and working space visible and accessible to the street outside. Shopkeepers operated from behind a counter at the street edge, their goods displayed or negotiated with passers-by, who might stop for a moment or engage in extended conversation without formally entering the shop. The thermopolia, the hot food counters, operated on the same principle. Their L-shaped marble counters with built-in ceramic food containers forming an interface between the shop interior and the street exterior, at which customers could eat standing up, taking their food from the container with their fingers or a spoon and consuming it on the spot or carrying it away. The noise of the Roman street was a constant subject of complaint in Roman literature. Martial and Juvenal, writing in the 1st and 2nd century CE, described the din of the Roman city in terms that suggest a sensory environment of considerable intensity. The carts and wagons whose movement was heavily restricted in the city during much of the daylight, especially in the crowded central areas, and which therefore moved noisily through the night. The shouting of street vendors advertising their wares. The sounds of construction as the city continuously built and rebuilt. Itself, the complaints of neighbors through thin walls, the barking of dogs, the crying of children. The only sound conspicuously absent from these complaints is the internal combustion engine, but in every other respect the Roman urban soundscape, as the ancient writers describe it, sounds recognizable to anyone who has lived in a busy modern city. The Roman system of time measurement was different from ours in ways that affected the rhythm of daily life significantly. The Romans divided both the daylight period and the night period each into 12 hours, with the consequence that the length of the hour varied with the season. A daylight hour in summer was considerably longer than one in winter, since the daylight period being divided was itself considerably longer in summer. This variable length hour meant that the Roman timetable was necessarily approximate in ways that a fixed hour system does not permit, and references to the 3rd hour or the 6th hour in ancient texts communicate a rough time of day rather than a precise moment. The sundial, which could indicate the current hour when the sun was shining, was the most common timekeeping instrument in public spaces, and water clocks, clepsydry, were used in more controlled interior environments where precision was required. The Roman night was divided not into hours, but into 4 watches, night watches originally deriving from military practice, which provided a rough structure for the dark portion of the day when sundials were useless. The life expectancy of Romans was, by modern standards, short, and the constant presence of death shaped Roman life and Roman culture in ways that modern Western societies, which tend to sequester death as much as possible from daily experience, can find difficult to fully imaginatively inhabit. High infant and child mortality meant that many Roman families experienced the death of children as a routine rather than exceptional grief, and the funerary archaeology reflects this reality. Child burials are numerous across the Roman world, and the care sometimes evident in their preparation. Toys placed with the body, small offerings of food, jewelry in miniature sizes, speaks to the real grief of parents who lost children with the frequency that the mortality statistics predict. The tombs and funerary monuments of the wealthy lined the roads outside Roman cities, their inscriptions competing for the attention of passers-by in a way that reflects the Roman belief that immortality of a kind was possible through continued remembrance. As long as one's name was read aloud from an inscription, one continued in some sense to exist. The inscriptions on Roman tombs frequently addressed the passerby directly, asking them to stop and read, to remember the person whose remains lie within, to carry the name forward through the act of reading it aloud. The abbreviated formula STTL, Sit Tibi Terra Levis, May the earth rest light upon you, appears on thousands of Roman grave inscriptions, a formula so routine that it was reduced to initials for convenience, but one whose sentiment, the wish for comfortable rest beneath the covering earth, is recognizable across the millennia. The mysteries of death and the hope for something beyond it drove many Romans to the various mystery religions that flourished in the imperial period alongside the official state cult. The Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, the cult of Isis from Egypt, the cult of Mithras that spread particularly through the military, The various Orphic and Bakshic religious associations that promised their initiates special knowledge and special fate after death. All of these offered Romans something that the official Roman state religion did not particularly concern itself with providing: a personal relationship with a deity who cared about the individual soul and whose rituals promised transformation, purification, and the hope of a blessed afterlife. The spread of these mystery traditions through the social fabric of the empire, their appeal cutting across social classes, and their rituals providing experiences of community and of personal religious encounter quite different from the civic rituals of the state cult, helps explain why the religious world of the empire was not spiritually empty before Christianity spread. Christianity developed from Jewish tradition and cannot be reduced to a mystery cult, but it entered a world where many people were already seeking personal salvation, moral community, and a meaningful hope beyond death. Daily life in Rome itself was not the same as daily life in the provinces, and this difference matters. Too often, ancient Rome is imagined as if the city of Rome were the whole empire. But for most people under Roman rule, Rome was a distant authority, a name on coins, a language on inscriptions, a tax demand, a legal framework, a military presence, a road, a governor, a market opportunity, a style of building, a bathhouse, a promise of citizenship, or a threat of punishment. The empire was experienced locally. In southern Gaul, Roman life blended with older Celtic traditions. Towns adopted forums, baths, amphitheaters, Latin inscriptions, and Roman-style houses, but local names, gods, family patterns, and rural customs persisted. In North Africa, cities like Carthage, Leptis Magna, and Thuga became profoundly Roman and profoundly African at the same time, producing senators, jurists, writers, and emperors while remaining rooted in local landscapes and older Punic and Berber histories. In the Greek East, Rome governed cities whose cultural prestige was older than Rome's own literary civilization. A wealthy citizen of Ephesus, Athens, or Alexandria might be politically Roman while intellectually Greek, worshipping local gods, reading Homer, paying Roman taxes, and honoring the emperor in public cult. Language followed this division. Latin dominated law, military administration, and public identity in the western provinces. Greek remained the great language of culture, commerce, and administration in much of the eastern Mediterranean. Local languages continued beneath both. A person could be multilingual without thinking that strange. A merchant might calculate in one language, pray in another, speak to family in a third, and address an official in a fourth. Romanization was not a simple replacement of one identity by another. It was a layering. Citizenship changed over time. In the early empire, Roman citizenship was a privilege with legal and social advantages, unevenly distributed across the provinces. Veterans might receive it after service. Local elites might acquire it through favor or municipal status. Freed slaves in certain contexts received it. In 212 CE, the Emperor Caracalla extended Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire, a dramatic legal transformation whose motives remain debated. But long before that decree, citizenship functioned as an aspiration and a tool. It drew local elites into the Roman system because becoming Roman offered practical benefits without always requiring the abandonment of local identity. For ordinary provincials, the most visible Roman presence might be military. Forts, roads, supply depots, veteran colonies, and frontier towns brought soldiers into local economies. Soldiers bought food, hired services, formed relationships, fathered children, wrote letters, and carried gods and habits from one end of the empire to another. A Syrian archer could serve on the Danube. A Batavian horseman could serve in Britain. A Spaniard could retire in North Africa. The army moved people as well as power, and in doing so it made the empire more connected than any map alone can show. The provincial city was where empire became daily life. The forum gave local elites a stage for status. The bathhouse gave residents a shared Roman habit. The amphitheater or theater provided spectacle. The temple of the imperial cult linked local loyalty to the emperor's image. Inscriptions recorded gifts by benefactors, a portico, a fountain, a road, a bath, a statue. These gifts were not pure charity. They were the social currency of local power. A wealthy provincial proved his importance by building for the city, and the city repaid him with honor, memory, and inscriptions that still speak 2,000 years later. This is why daily life in the Roman Empire was both familiar and different wherever one went. The same types of buildings appeared again and again, but the smells, languages, foods, gods, climates, and memories changed. Roman Britain was not Roman Egypt. Roman Syria was not Roman Spain. Yet a traveler could move through all of them and find enough repeated forms to know he was still inside Rome. That balance between diversity and repetition was one of the empire's most remarkable achievements. One of the reasons Roman daily life can be reconstructed with such vividness is that the evidence is unusually intimate. Rome left histories, laws, poems, speeches, letters, satire, philosophy, biographies, technical manuals, recipes, inscriptions, papyri, coins, buildings, painted walls, garbage dumps, shipwrecks, skeletons, tools, and entire buried towns. Each type of evidence has limits, but together they create a density of information that few ancient civilizations can match. Pompeii and Herculaneum are central because they preserve interruption. Most cities are archaeological palimpsests, built, rebuilt, robbed, repaired, abandoned, reused, overwritten. Pompeii was stopped. Not perfectly, not without later excavation damage and interpretation problems, but stopped in a way that preserves streets, houses, shops, shrines, bakeries, brothels, workshops, graffiti, election notices, wall paintings, food remains, and the haunting casts of bodies in the spaces their bodies left in ash. It gives daily life shape. A counter is not an abstract food service establishment. It is a counter with jars, paintings, residue, and a street outside. A bakery is not a concept. It is a room with mills, ovens, and loaves. Graffiti is especially valuable because it breaks the polished surface of elite literature. On walls, Romans wrote jokes, insults, love declarations, political slogans, advertisements, accounts, boasts, names, drawings, and nonsense. Some graffiti is crude. Some is touching. Some is political. Some is simply proof that people have always wanted to leave a mark where others might see it. The wall becomes a social medium. A person who had no hope of writing a book could still scratch a sentence into plaster and be heard by neighbors then and by archaeologists now. Inscriptions turn memory public. Tombstones, building dedications, honorific statues, military diplomas, altar dedications, milestones, and official decrees give us names that would otherwise be lost. They tell us that a freedman paid for a monument to his wife, that a guild honored its patron, that a soldier served 25 years, that a mother buried her child, that a town thanked a benefactor for a bathhouse, that an emperor repaired a road. Inscriptions are formal, but formality does not make them lifeless. Often the formula is the point. Ordinary people adopted the language of Roman memory because writing one's name in stone was a way of entering history. Papyri from Egypt add another dimension. Because Egypt's dry climate preserved documents that would rot elsewhere, we possess contracts, tax records, petitions, private letters, school exercises, receipts, census declarations, and lists from ordinary provincial life. These documents show Rome not as marble, but as paperwork. people registering property, complaining about theft, arranging marriages, borrowing money, disputing boundaries, paying taxes, sending family news. Bureaucracy can be dull when alive, but when preserved across 2,000 years, it becomes one of the most human records imaginable. Archaeology of rubbish is just as important as archaeology of monuments. Broken pottery, animal bones, seeds, fish bones, amphora stamps, worn shoes, discarded tools, and latrine deposits reveal what people ate, traded, used, and threw away. Monte Testaccio, the artificial hill of discarded amphora fragments in Rome, is not beautiful in the way a temple is beautiful, but historically it is magnificent. It is consumption made into landscape. Millions of broken containers, many connected with imported olive oil, stacked, discarded, and preserved as a record of supply, administration, trade, and appetite. A hill of rubbish can tell the truth about an empire as clearly as a triumphal arch. The danger is that vivid evidence can mislead. Pompeii was not Rome. Elite literature was not ordinary speech. Satire exaggerates. Moralists complain. Inscriptions flatter. Archaeological survival is uneven. Egypt preserves papyri because of climate, not because paperwork mattered only there. We must read all evidence carefully. But when the pieces are placed together, the Roman world becomes unusually close. We know too much to keep it distant. We can hear the shopkeepers, see the painted walls, smell the food, read the jokes, count the loaves, follow the water channels, and stand in the doorway between a house and a street where ordinary life once moved. The most important thing to remember is that daily life was not gentle simply because it was ordinary. Ordinary life contained constant pressure. A Roman might worry about rent, fire, sickness, childbirth, business failure, a patron's displeasure, a slave's punishment, a child's fever, a bad harvest, a grain shortage, a lawsuit, a military levy, an omen, a debt, a rumor, or the emperor's death. The empire provided roads, law, markets, coinage, baths, and security in many places. It also demanded taxes, obedience, labor, military service, and acceptance of hierarchy. Roman daily life was stable for many, precarious for many, and brutal for some. This complexity is what makes it interesting. A simplified Rome is either glorious marble or cruel empire. The real Rome was both more impressive and more uncomfortable. It could build aqueducts and own human beings. It could preserve legal rights and stage executions as entertainment. It could produce poetry of extraordinary delicacy and jokes scratched into latrine walls. It could give a poor citizen access to baths and bread while giving an enslaved person no legal ownership of his own body. It could be practical, superstitious, elegant, filthy, disciplined, chaotic, tender, and violent in the same day. The ordinary Roman morning, then, is not small history. It is the empire made visible at human scale. Bread shows agriculture, trade, labor, and state power. Clothing shows gender, class, citizenship, and work. Baths show engineering, sociability, and inequality. Religion shows fear, gratitude, ritual, and political identity. A tombstone shows family, memory, literacy, money, and hope. The daily object is never only itself. It is a doorway into the whole system. This is why daily life can sometimes hold a viewer more strongly than battles. Battles decide borders and rulers. Daily life reveals what those borders and rulers meant. We can admire Caesar's campaigns and Augustus's settlement, but the real test of Rome's endurance was whether people could wake, eat, work, worship, bathe, love, raise children, bury the dead, and begin again the next day inside the world Rome had built. For centuries, across huge parts of the Mediterranean, they did. The Roman world was, in its daily texture, a world of remarkable variety and remarkable uniformity simultaneously. From one end of the empire to the other, from Hadrian's Wall in Britain to the Euphrates frontier, from the Rhine to the Sahara, the fundamental features of Roman urban life repeated themselves with a consistency that reflected the power of a shared culture to shape daily experience across enormous distances. The Forum with its basilica and its temple, the bathhouse with its sequence of heated rooms, the amphitheater for gladiatorial shows, the theater for dramatic performances, the grid of streets with their combination of shops and apartments, the Latin or Greek in the East, inscriptions on public buildings and private tombs, the same gods in their same temples with their same prescribed rituals, the same legal system applied by Roman magistrates across the provinces, the same silver coinage bearing the emperor's image circulating through the same commercial networks. And yet within this shared framework, the diversity was enormous. The Roman Britain that archaeologists excavate, with its cold climate and its mixture of indigenous Celtic and imported Mediterranean elements, was a very different lived reality from the Roman North Africa of fertile grain fields and prosperous cities, or the Roman Syria of sophisticated urban centers with traditions of philosophy and learning reaching back centuries before Rome arrived. The Roman world was not simply one thing, but many things organized around enough shared elements to constitute a recognizable whole, and the daily life of any particular Roman was shaped by the specific combination of universal Roman features and local particular conditions that characterized their specific place and time within that enormous whole. What unites all of them, finally, across all the diversity of language and climate and local tradition and social position, is the simple fact of their humanity, their hunger and their thirst, and their desire for warmth and for company, their love for their children and their grief when children died, their fear of the gods and their hope that the gods were listening, their pleasure in a warm bath after a cold day and in a cup of wine in the evening among friends, their hunger for entertainment, and for gossip and for the small pleasures that make an ordinary day bearable. The Romans were different from us in ways that historical study reveals more thoroughly the more carefully one looks. But they were also, underneath all the specific differences of culture and technology and social structure, recognizably and completely human, and it is this recognition across the enormous distance of 2,000 years that makes their daily life worth knowing. And so we come to the end of this look into the daily life of ancient Rome. We have not followed a conquering army. We have followed bread from oven to hand, water from aqueduct to fountain, wool from fuller's tub to toga, oil from amphora to lamp, prayer from household shrine to public altar, and a human day from darkness before dawn to the quiet moment when the lamp burns low again. We have stood in crowded apartment rooms and elite dining rooms, in streets loud with carts and vendors, in baths warm with steam, in shops open to the pavement, in schools where children traced letters, in temples where priests repeated ancient formulas, in amphitheaters where the crowd roared, and beside tombs where the dead asked the living to stop and read their names. The Romans are gone, but their ordinary life is not as distant as it first appears. Their laws and gods and hierarchies were not ours. Their acceptance of slavery and public violence belongs to a world we must not romanticize. But their hunger, fatigue, vanity, ambition, grief, humor, tenderness, superstition, love of comfort, fear of illness, pride in children, and desire to be remembered are entirely recognizable. The distance is 2,000 years. The humanity is close. Somewhere in the ancient city, a baker is opening the oven. A child is waking in an upper room. A woman is arranging her hair. A man is hurrying to greet his patron. A slave is carrying water. A shopkeeper is lifting the shutters. A priest is preparing the morning offering. A cart is rattling away before daylight fills the street. The Roman day begins again. Sleep well. Good night.